iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another session of the iHeartPodcast Speaker Series. Really, really appreciate you to take the time and hang out with us for a half hour today. For anyone that's heard these before, we started doing these about 2+ years ago when the world was moving into a sort of different mode. We were all moving into a bit of quarantine, maybe a lot of quarantine. And we wanted to try to figure out a way to stay more connected with each other. So we started these weekly conversations with content makers, with partners that we're working with at iHeartMedia in podcasting as just a way to have great conversations week in, week out, and to share those with folks as we thought that they may want to hear them. And we've just had incredible sessions with everybody from Martha Stewart to Malcolm Gladwell. And this week is sort of no exception. We are launching a show soon called StraightioLab. It's a play on a very famous seminal podcast called RadioLab. It's with two comedians, George Severus and Sam Taggart. First of all, George, Sam, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. I'm really, really psyched to talk to you about this wacky, crazy, very kind of, I think, unique new show that you guys have dreamed up. But thanks for being here.
Well, thanks
first.
for having us.
It's an honor to be your most famous guest.
Yeah,
ever.
Malcolm Gladwell found dead in a ditch.
R.I.P.
I feel like because before we started this, I said to these guys, hey, we're going to pre-record some of this. It's going to go way off the rails. And you know what? The surprise is going to be, I'm not going to edit any of it out. So we'll see how it goes. George, you are a comedian. You're a writer. You're in Brooklyn. You're currently a senior editor at Gawker. Your stand-ups appeared all over the place, but at least on Comedy Central.
At the very least.
At the very least. And you were selected as a new face of comedy at the Just for Laughs Festival in Montreal. There's a bunch of other stuff here that I promise you is impressive. I'm going to skip to you, Sam. You're a comedian, writer. You're an actor. You live in Brooklyn too. You've appeared on stuff like Search Parties, Lots of Spookies. You're also a writer on some stuff. You were a part of Comedy Central's Digital Creators in 2020. You're part of a list that I find kind of funny. Vulture put out this list of comedians you should and will know for 2021, which is like the most aggressively titled list I've heard. Like, I don't have a choice. I'm going to know about these people.
I mean, isn't that how it works, whether you like it or not?
It's a like it or not list. But look, you have this idea of a show called StraightioLab. I don't want to like make it too dramatic, but it is sort of pointed and edgy and cool in its own way that I think is like a pitch we hadn't heard before. We're like, wow, that's like a weird new idea. Maybe start with you, Sam. Like, where did this idea come from? Why do this? What's the genesis of it?
Well, George and I wanted to work together on something, on a podcast of some sort, and we were just sort of, brainstorming and trying to figure out what we could talk about week after week. And I honestly, I think George came up with it, was like, what if we do a straight topic every single week, talk about straight culture? And it was like, we were like, wait, it's too simple. It's too easy. But yeah, I think in doing it, I think we were both like, just trying to make it as like weird and interesting as possible for like what the premise is. George, did I say anything incorrect factually?
So that was all wrong. Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing more harrowing than having a brainstorming session where nothing is coming out. And we were, and like, we did, to our credit, have many very good ideas, but they all kept being like, it's like, you keep thinking you have to do something so weird or specific. And in fact, when you look at like all our favorite podcasts, they just have like a simple premise, and then your job is to make it weird and specific, just like episode by episode. So when we came up with the idea of having each episode be about a different element of straight culture, or like straight topic, it seemed almost too dumb to be like, we were like, A, this is dumb, and B, surely someone has already done this in like some like terrible show in the 90s or something. But luckily they hadn't. And then it's kind of like, what's nice about the premise being like a different topic every week is that it's endlessly generative. So, you know, it's like you can do something simple like football, which, yes, obviously that is a straight topic, or you can do what some of them are so kind of like out there. Like, we had one that was like, one of our topics was math. One of the topics was like photos of siblings where they're, what was it, Sam? So photos of siblings where they're accidentally touching each other or something.
Like, or like my favorite is like trust issues. And it's like
trust issues.
So
yeah. And then it also becomes, sorry, go ahead.
They are what they are. The topics are what they are. I don't know if I need to do any more than like read the episode, the show description, which is like, wow, that packs a punch in a weird kind of unexpected way. So it's like StraightioLab is an intellectual podcast where smart comedians George Severus and Sam Taggart unpack the rich, multicolored tapestry of straight culture. In each episode, George and Sam are joined by a guest to hold a mirror to society and finally get to the bottom of mysterious and perverse topics such as college fraternities, gender reveal parties, the military, themed restaurants, and the concept of the holidays. Scared? Good. Why is this, Sam, why is this scared? First of all, what is a straight topic?
You know,
wow, we're going back to basics.
Yeah, you know.
I mean, listen, if we have to explain it to you, you're already
honey. Yeah, you know, it can be literally any element, anything that seems straight at all. And we just unpack it as if it is, you know, intellectual and important. You know, I think the average way that a gay comedian duo would talk about straight stuff is how stupid it is, and we thought it was so funny to treat it with reverence and
yeah. Important. Well, that was where like I mean, obviously we've strayed far from the RadioLab inspiration, but in the beginning, the idea was to be like, okay, the joke is that we are seriously contemplating an issue like, you know, college fraternities as like a sociological phenomenon, as though it's like the craziest thing ever and we're like investigating straight culture. But yeah, anything that you know, anything that stems from, in terms of what a straight topic is, anything that stems from a nuclear family, America, you know, big business,
sure.
Sports.
I mean, and anything can be argued to be straight. I think is also, when we have guests come on, sometimes I think they'll try to trip us up and be like, what if your topic was the Queer Eye guys? And it's like, well, let's see how that fits in.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, they are, because straight people like
it's like this expanding universe.
Yeah.
Let me take a step back. So one of the parts of these conversations that I've found kind of cool is to find out where people got this bug, this creator's bug or comedic bug or whatever, storytelling bug to start with. And these kind of origin stories I was a kid and my dad used to perform at the dinner table every night when we'd have dessert, and it just sparked me like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do with my life. Or I told jokes and it was a secret power I had in high school and it got me friends. And that was starting with you, Sam. Like, where did that start? Like, at what point were you like, A, I like this, B, I might be actually kind of good at this? Like, where did it come from?
It was a rolling process. I think I was a very like quiet child, but like with that sort of observational child. But then like, you know, I was obsessed with like SNL, to be the most basic person on earth, and sort of like, how do you get into this? And like tried to like write sketches and funny dances for the school talent show, and sort of like started to feel it out through that. And then like just sort of piecemeal was like, okay, I guess I can, like when I got to college, I was like, oh, there is an improv troupe here and I can try it and I don't have to commit my life to it. And then it was like, oh, this kind of works. I kind of fit in with this. And then it was like, well, I guess I'll move to New York and try it. And then it was like, okay, well, I guess it's kind of working. So I'll keep going until someone tells me to stop. And so far, no one, I mean, Vulture is telling people they have to listen to me. And so far, so good. But yeah, it was more of just like I've always had like a love of like comedy and the wanting to like even like a strong taste in comedy. Like I always like the silly, weird, goofy stuff, and sort of wanting to like champion that type of tone in the world.
What have you liked more? Do you like more sitting in your apartment developing an idea or a new routine or a new character or writing? Or do you like more being on stage and the fun, and I imagine sometimes the pain of like being in front of an audience and trying stuff, trying to connect, trying to make people laugh? What's more fulfilling? Are they just two totally different things that are incomparable?
I think they feed into each other. I think the live performance element is where I really learned how to write jokes, because before that I was kind of leaning on being weird and sort of being like just wacky. And it was like, no, you have to learn how to like phrase something. And so that like I did learn like getting that. So that's like where I figured it out. But then to take that to my writing has helped a lot. But I think, I mean, there's nothing better than live performance. It just, you get the immediate feedback. Even when it's bad, you're kind of like, well, I know it's bad. And I don't have to like toil away for months wondering if it was bad. I know right now. So it's kind of a priceless activity.
Mm-hmm. Something you just said, though, sparked a curiosity for me. That notion of initially, I just tried to be weird and I thought maybe that could carry it, just to put words in your mouth a little bit. And then I realized at some point, and there's actually like, I got to like wordsmith the thing so that it is better than it could be. Like there's a craft to this stuff. Who told you that? Who said, hey, dude, there's actually like work here that you got to do? Like, what, like, was that, or did you just realize it? Like, what was that moment?
It was kind of both. I was trying to meet in the middle somewhere, and honestly, maybe this is too earnest, I can't tell, but my boyfriend, like we met when I had been doing comedy for like 6 months in New York, and he was very like, you know, you're gonna have to let people in, like you're gonna have to like explain to people what's going on in your head, like you can't just, basically you're putting up weird walls so people don't know who you are. Wow. And I was kind of like pushed back on that. And I was like, you don't know me. Yeah. And now like in retrospect, it really helped me. And I like couldn't get out of my head. And it really pushed me to think about how I communicate with people and how I can be more direct and like open.
George, what about you? Where did it start? First of all, where did that inspiration come from, if that's what it was?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a very funny family. And in fact, funny in like a biting way. Like I've told Sam this, but it took a while for me to unlearn that not everyone thinks it's funny to like insult them constantly. Like it genuinely, it has ruined friendships for me. But like in my family group chat, you know, it's like, for instance, my mom recently bought the ugliest couches I've ever seen and sent a photo of them. And then it was just like text after text of people dragging her through the mud and everyone laughing. And it's like, that's kind of like how we bond with one another. My dad, truly my dad, they're like very shiny because it's truly the worst couches you've ever seen. My dad was like, I'm going to need sunglasses to like go into the room or whatever. Then my sister was like sending a meme that was like someone, and it's like a gif of someone entering the room and then light like flashes in her eyes and she like is blown back or whatever. Then like what, you know, it's whatever. So that's kind of like how I grew up and very much how my family operates. And you know, we're also like Greek, so we're very loud and everyone's talking over one another, whatever. Anyway, so that was one thing for sure. And then aside from that, I just loved stand-up when I was a kid. We especially like I think there were two prongs of it. One was like I loved like George Carlin and Richard Pryor and all that, like all the stuff that I had been told is like the classics that you have to get into. And I, especially George Carlin, I really was like idolized throughout high school. And then I also loved, like, Joan Rivers was huge for me, and kind of like all the women that had not gotten as much attention as the guys. And you know, I loved Margaret Cho and all the women of SNL, and you know, all those people. But because despite the fact that my family is funny, they are incredibly academically oriented. My parents both have engineering PhDs and met when they were getting their, I mean, it's like they are very, it was very much, I'm very much like the black sheep in the sense in that I'm doing like something creative. And so because of that, I didn't even attempt to start to do anything like that until I was maybe like 24, 25. I had graduated college. I'd gotten a non-creative degree. And then I had like moved to a different city. And for the first time, I was like, okay, like I'm financially independent. I don't feel like I owe something to someone. And I can like, and I am also in a new city where I don't know anyone. So nothing's holding me back. And I was in Boston at the time. And so I started basically doing like open mic comedy in Boston. And then slowly met people through that and started getting on at clubs and started doing comedy festivals. And so it all kind of came from there.
So you hit upon two folks that you said were huge influences, George Carlin and well, let's focus on him actually for a second.
Yeah.
I think for folks who, I'll put it this way in a silly kind of analogy. When I'm not a big sports guy, but when I go to a basketball game with somebody who is, and they reveal the game to me, it's like, oh my God, this is like incredibly complicated. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like, why is George Carlin so iconic? What did he do? What was he doing that was like, no, you guys don't understand? Like he was doing this and that, and it was totally new. What is it about him?
I mean, it's interesting because in terms of actual joke writing, I think someone like Richard Pryor is like, just technically speaking, a better joke writer. I think the George Carlin thing, for me at least, is I was at the exact right age where I was also simultaneously learning about the world and about politics and developing my own views and stuff. And when you watch Carlin's later work, it's in fact so preachy that people today might call it like woke or something. Like it's, so it's truly like, it was an education in just like the world as well as just in comedy writing. So I think that was like, I had never heard someone talking about like religion in that way, or politics, or kind of like explaining politics in a different way other than just like there are Democrats and there are Republicans. Like he kind of I think he was a very good, he had a really good like bullshit meter, basically. He just was able to look at a situation and find what was, to use like an outdated term, phony about it. And then the jokes were based on that, which I think like, especially when you're a teenager, is very affecting because you're like, well, no one gets everyone's fake and only I can see that.
The other one I was going to mention is Joan Rivers. Why is she, why do you mention her? I mean, there's obvious reasons just in terms of the barriers she broke, which is nuts, but what do you see that maybe non-comedians aren't seeing?
Yeah. I mean, Joan Rivers to me is just like, I have to say, I don't stand by everything she's ever said by any means, but just like her irreverence and how she would just like say anything, offend people to their faces, say just like truly awful things, like basically like kind of anything for the punchline, anything for the joke. I think I really respected that like at every turn people were like, fuck off, and she was like, no. And I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, the Joan Rivers documentary, it's called Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, is a really, really great movie. And there's this one scene where she has this giant kind of like file cabinet where the files are note cards. So it's all different little drawers kind of one next to the other. And it's all the jokes she's ever written. She just like has them all, each one on an index card, and it's this giant filing cabinet. And it's just like, I don't know. It's almost like comedy as a as like a personal ethic. It's like, this is how she lives her life, is in a comedian's way. And that's how she processes the world. That's how she communicates with people. It's like she makes sense of something by finding what's crazy about it, or by pointing out what's weird about it or something. So yeah, I think she really kind of walked the walk, so to speak.
Sam, I want to go back to you for a sec, just on this idea of, because I think a lot of things that connect great comedians, but George, Joan, certainly that kind of like total unapologetic brave. Like you could throw all kinds of words at what they were doing. Also just really funny, but that stuff too. I think at least, especially maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, being a comedian it's maybe not one of the hardest jobs in the world, but it's definitely one of the scariest. And that's a weird thing to put on it, I guess. Like when you look at cancel culture, when you look at the way our society's changing, how fast somebody can be criticized for the stuff they say, the out of contextness of things, it gets really, I would think really scary, anxious to be, that's literally what I'm here for. Like I have to do that stuff. That's my job as a comedian, is to push envelopes a little bit, make people a little bit uncomfortable. Yes, make them laugh, and there's countless examples of this now across the last 2 years, especially, I think, as quarantine has made everybody a little weirder. Right. Long preamble to the question of like, Sam, how does that get in your head? Like as a comedian, do you feel yourself limiting yourself more, where you're like, oh man, I can't tell that joke anymore because I'll get in trouble? Or do you be like, no, now that I said that, I have to tell that joke? How do you process all this?
I'm pretty unprecious with my material. Like if something's not working for any reason, I'll just cut it and find something that does. So like there's nothing that I can think that I would like dig my heels in about. I think like, it's generally like, George looks up to like the George Carlin types. I've looked up to more like Steve Martin was like my comedy idol in high school, who, can kind of do like, because it's not about like talking about the specifics. It's about like showing how we are stupid inside, like showing how like goofy it is to be alive. And so like, I find that to be pretty easy to do no matter what the political temperature is. So that's kind of how my North Star. So I don't get too concerned with that. And like, I think every like starting out comedian tries to dip into like offensive, and mostly when I did any of that, I'm embarrassed by it. Not because it was like offensive, but it's just because it's like, you don't know who you are yet. Like that's not you. And it sometimes feels, it's just like kind of lazy a lot of times, I think.
For you felt like, oh, that's kind of me being a comedian, but not necessarily being the Sam Taggart version of a comedian.
Yeah.
I've got to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. When you see other comedians get taken to task or get into trouble or whatever because of the things they say, what happens in your brain? Do you think like, guys, that's their job? Or do you go to a place of like, yeah, you should probably be more careful? Or do you just say, I don't know, that's to each his own. That's not my thing. Like, where do you go in your head?
I kind of go like, and maybe this is mean, but I'm kind of like, grow up. Like, like it's just like to dig your heels in that. It's like, I mean, it's case by case, of course. And like, but sometimes, a lot of times I get more annoyed with like the inauthenticity of it, where it's like, I think the job of a comedian is to be like authentic and be honest and be yourself. And it's more like trying to find like almost like politically aligning yourself with something rather than finding an emotional truth.
George, what about you? Is there an anxiety to being a comedian that maybe wasn't there before, where you're sort of like, oh God, my whole job is to speak truth to power, and now that's really hard to do? Or is it like, no, I'm just trying to be funny?
I think that I care more about, on a creative level, I care more about being original and saying something no one else has thought of, or saying something in a new way, than I do about hitting the topics of the day. And so in that context, I actually think talking about cancel culture is the least interesting thing you can possibly do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm just kind of like, it's almost like the specific debates are besides the point, but like I have now heard every possible joke about cancel culture, every possible joke about how society is changing and you can't say anything anymore, that like, I would love to challenge someone to say something, someone being a comedian, to like say something new about it. But until I can figure out something that has not been said about it, then, I'm not going to talk about it just because it's a hot topic and it'll get attention or something. So I mean, yeah. And often, you know, it's interesting. Comedy, much like a lot of funny art forms, I think political cartoons are like this. I think, you know, to some extent, basically what I'm trying to say is that there's this paradox where on the one hand, people want to have it both ways. They want to be like, well, I'm just joking, nothing serious, and it doesn't, anything I'm saying doesn't matter because I'm just joking. And what you said, that it is the most important job in the world because you're speaking truth to power. And I think that is kind of disingenuous a little bit. And you have to, like, at the end of the day, literally have a sense of humor about it and kind of be like, well, we're all, it's playful. And yes, like, I'm going to touch on a serious topic, or I do have certain beliefs that I hold very dear, and I really believe them. And I would push back if someone disagreed with me, but like the joy of it comes in like the dance between like the serious and the not serious. So, I mean, to get up on a stage and kind of consider the audience like your enemy or something is just like, what a terrible way to live.
Yeah, that's an odd perspective. That's like Vulture telling me he will be.
Yeah.
And were they wrong?
But I mean, that bridge is fascinating. There's this little skit that Bo Burnham does in the Inside Outtakes, or where he spoofs Joe Rogan, and he does exactly what you're talking about, George, where it's like there's a little bit where he's like, oh, we're just comedians, it's no big deal, and then the next moment he's like, and it's the truth, we speak like philosophers.
Yeah.
And it's like, which one is it?
Yeah.
But I guess the point is, I don't know, it's all pretty funny.
Sure.
But listen, this is I'll close on talking about this as a podcast again to bring it full circle. So StraightioLab is a podcast. This medium of podcasting that we at iHeartMedia have fallen in love with has just exploded from a fledgling super fan base 10, 15 years ago to you now have 1 out of 3 Americans a month listening to podcasts. 120 million people a month in the country listen to podcasts. It's crazy. It's the most recent new medium to reach mass reach audiences. And I wanted to get your guys' take on it as relative newcomers to making podcasts. What we hear a lot, if there is a through line across all these conversations we've had in these sessions, it's people who are really skilled from other mediums jump into writers, actors, whatever, jumping into podcasting and thinking, wow, this medium feels unique. It feels like I have a lot of control. I have a direct relationship with consumers or listeners or audience members that I didn't have in other mediums, and a bunch of other things. And it's usually like from, again, like Will Ferrell to Will Packer. Everybody is like, this is really amazing. I feel kind of like I have controls back creatively that I didn't have for a while. Sam, start with you. Like, what's it been like to jump into podcasting? I assume you listened to podcasts prior, but what's it like making them? What's the medium feel like?
I found it so surprisingly fun and refreshing. Like, we're both kind of cynical people. And I think we were like, oh, well, let's see how this goes. Like, you know, there's like punchlines, like hack punchlines about like people with podcasts. And then, so it was like, all right, well, let's just try it out. And then it was like, wait, this kind of, it's like so much fun. And I have found that, like, for me, it does combine like my improv training and my like joke writing, and like I can kind of like be myself, but be like slip into like bits and characters in a way that is so fun and kind of specific to this form. And it's just like we've reached, like, I've done stand-up in New York for like nearly a decade, and you know, it's been like hit or miss, but like pretty like average. And like then it was like not average in the sense that I was just like a good stand-up in New York. And then it was like, oh wow, as soon as we started a podcast, now we have like fans, and people really feel like they know us, and they kind of do, and they're like kind of smart and they care. It's like really changed everything. It's shocking to me. Actually. Awesome. Yeah. George, how do you feel?
I love, by the way, that Sam's fans are kind of smart. George, George.
No, I think he was talking about the fans of the podcast. Yeah. But to answer your question, mine are smarter.
Yeah. George heads are the smart ones.
What is your take on that, George? What's it been like jumping into it?
I mean, I completely agree with everything Sam said. The one piece of context is just that like we've been doing this podcast now for about 2.5 years, just on our own, self-producing it, and now we're going to relaunch on iHeart in the fall. But when we started it like the first month of lockdown, and Sam and I before that, I mean, our main thing was live performance. Like we would perform almost every night in New York, and that was our main creative outlet. Neither of us at the time had another like comedy day job, I don't think, like we do now. Like, and so that was our entire life, really. It was like performing at, both of us do stand up. Like Sam had this like amazing solo show that he used to do. We would host our own shows, perform other people's shows, whatever. And so one of the reasons why the podcast was so good is because we actually poured in all our creative energy into it, because it was all we had, because it was like March and April of 2020. And since things have reopened, it's been nice to kind of like see how we've both changed now as performers, having done this for 2 years. And we do live shows of the podcast with special guests in New York. So we've done 3 of those, and it's been interesting to see what it's like to go the other way and be kind of like podcasters who now perform. But yeah, I mean, and to Sam's point, like we have the listeners have a Discord, which is like an online kind of chat forum, I guess, community, and we are also in it, so we see people talk about the podcast, and when a new episode comes out, they will have conversations about it and be like, what was your favorite part and who's your favorite guest? And the other day they actually all decided at the same time to re-listen to an old episode to discuss it together from like 1.5 years ago, which I thought was very cool. And so I think the community around it, and also being able to see that happen in real time and not just kind of hope that it's happening behind closed doors, is, yeah, I mean, like Sam said, it was the first time I ever felt like I broke through in some way. Like, yeah.
That is awesome. So I didn't track that. We had one other comedian named Jess Hilarious that we do work with in parallel. Similar story, which was like, my job was stand-up comedy, and it was not possible during quarantine. And similarly, she resorted to trying podcasting. And it's so interesting to me, though, to hear how that then feeds your stand-up comedy coming out of quarantine again. And it changes how you do that and how you approach it. Listen, this has been awesome to be able to talk to you guys about this stuff and what drives you and where you come from. And the show is amazing. And like we always wrap these, but I really mean it. I just deeply, deeply appreciate you putting your trust and partnership in iHeartMedia. It means the world to us for such a great show like this. So Sam, George, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everybody, thanks for hanging out with us this week again. Really appreciate it. I'm Conal Byrne, CEO of the iHeartMedia Digital Audio Group. This has been an iHeartPodcast speaker session. We will be back next week with more. Be well, stay safe. Take care.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.